welcome everybody to tonight's program on bibliotherapy, the use of literature for better mental wellness. So first of all, I'm Jerome, your moderator tonight. So before the program begins, I do have a few housekeeping announcements. So first, this webinar is being recorded, and towards the end, there will be a Q&A part. And then, of course, you are encouraged to send us your questions via the chat box. Now, with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Ella Berthoud, who is joining us from her home in the UK. Ella started reading on a journey from Tehran to London when she was 5. She then spent the next 13 years reading books in places like ski lifts and trampolines. She studied English literature at Cambridge University, where she read as many novels as she could at once. She continued on to the University of East London, where she studied fine art, and combined her twin passions of reading and painting by listening to books while creating works of art. She has worked as an artist in residence at Pentonville Prison, Friends School, Saffron Walden, and Queenswood School. So let's get right to the program. So Ella, what exactly is bibliotherapy? I mean, like, we all know about many good things about book reading, but I mean, when we are now talking about book reading has a therapeutic value. So what exactly is that?
Hello, Jerome, and it's great to be here. So bibliotherapy is the art of prescribing fiction to cure life's ailments, in a nutshell. So me and my friend Susan Elderkin believed that we had invented the idea of bibliotherapy when we first used to talk about it when we were at Cambridge University back in the day, studying English literature. And at that stage, we used to give each other books, which we would leave outside each other's bedrooms whenever one of us had a problem like a broken heart or worrying about the future. We would leave a novel for each other. And that's when we started talking about this idea of being book doctors. And we then very much believed it was completely our idea. We were totally original. But 10 years later, when we had both been living in the world and doing different things, Susan became an author of novels, I became an artist. We bumped into Alain de Botton, who runs the School of Life in London. And we said to him, what do you think about this idea of having bibliotherapy at the School of Life? And he said, fantastic idea. We then looked into bibliotherapy more deeply, and we discovered that it has actually been going as an idea since the time of Plato. So the Greeks were talking about bibliotherapy 2,000 years ago. So we realized we were not original at all, and that the Greek intellectuals had been using bibliotherapy as a way of healing people, and they were very wise. They used to put theatres right next to hospitals so that people could be healed by the arts as much as they were by traditional medicine. So the Greeks were very wise, and we realized that we came from a long history of bibliotherapy, which we researched in more detail and discovered that also in the Second World War, people used bibliotherapy for soldiers coming back with shell shock, and they used to give them Jane Austen as books to read to calm them down and bring them back into a calm place where everything was ordered and in a social structure that made sense, unlike it did in the trenches. So when we started off the bibliotherapy service at the School of Life, we had long chats with Alain de Botton about the best way of doing bibliotherapy one-to-one. And we decided the best way to do it was to start with a questionnaire. So I'm just going to show you the questionnaire of what it looks like when people get a questionnaire from the School of Life. So basically you sign up to a bibliotherapy session with the School of Life and you get sent this questionnaire. Is it clear? Can you see that, or is it a bit blurry?
It's clear.
You get the idea anyway. And on that questionnaire, there's lots of questions about your reading habits and also your personal life. So there's questions like, what books do you read? where do you read, when do you read, how do you read, did you read a lot in your childhood, which books do you love the most and the least, which books have had a big effect on your life, what in your mind constitutes a good read, and if there was such a thing as the perfect book for you, what would it be? And then we also ask personal questions like, how old are you single, married, cohabiting, do you have children, what are your passions, what is preoccupying you at the moment, where do you see yourself in 10 years time? So all of those questions help us, the bibliotherapist, to get to know the client and find out what's happening in their life and what kind of books they like to read. So after they fill in the questionnaire, they send it to us, and we, the bibliotherapist, look deeply at that and think about it. And then we have the bibliotherapy session, which takes an hour, and it's normally one-to-one in situ. So we used to always do the sessions at the School of Life in a kind of therapy room. So it was like a traditional therapy practice. But gradually, even before the pandemic, people started to prefer to do remote sessions, partly just because it was easier and because lots of them didn't live in London anyway. So we've been doing bibliotherapy sessions all around the world, in Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, Japan, Brazil, all kinds of places, New York. So all of these are remotely done over originally Skype, now often Zoom or whatever video platform. So that lasts for 1 hour. And then a few days later, when we've had a bit of time to mull it over, the bibliotherapist sends a prescription to the client, which again is in this kind of format. And the prescription has the ailment written on it. So if the person has an issue such as they might be bereaved, or they might be going through a divorce, or they might be retiring, they might be about to start a family, so that's the ailment which they are going through at the moment. Or it might just be they're fed up with their normal reading, they want to read something new. So we write that down, and then we write the dosage. So the dosage is how much should you read every day, and also suggestions about different ways of reading, which we'll come to later. And then the prescription has 6 books. So there's a paragraph describing why we're giving each book. So it has a list of all the different books that we're giving and the reasons for why we're giving those particular suggestions. So it's a very tailor-made individual prescription designed specifically for that person. So that's the way the general bibliotherapy sessions work. But after we had been doing the sessions at the School of Life for 5 years, Susan Elderkin and I decided to write a book which encloses the wisdom of our bibliotherapy sessions within the book. So that's The Novel Cure, an A to Z of literary remedies, which is a book where you can look up any ailment, from having no common sense, being depressed, being a hypochondriac, having doomed love, falling out of love with love, moving house, having a mother-in-law, any of those things, which all the ailments that you have in life, from the more serious to the more frivolous ailments. So we also have things like hiccups, or we have broken heart, but then we also have broken china. So we have some which are more kind of lighthearted. And then within that book, we have a cure in the form of a novel for each of those ailments. So mostly it's just one cure per ailment, but with some examples, we have 3 or 4 or 5 books if it's a very serious ailment like depression or loneliness. So Susan and I wrote that book, and it was published in 24 countries, which is very exciting. And then we decided to do a similar book, but for children. So this is The Story Cure, subtitled An A to Z of Books to Keep Kids Happy, Healthy and Wise. And that's the same idea as the Novel Cure, but it's all about children's books. It also has really lovely illustrations by an illustrator called Rohan Eason, who's fantastic. But this book is really aimed at the parents of the children. So the idea is that a parent can look up any issue that their children might be going through and find a cure for that issue, which is relevant to the age of their children. So with each different ailment, for instance, bullying, we have different age categories within the book. So we have a category which is a picture book, a category which is a chapter book for kids between maybe 7 and 11, and then a category which is young adult. So in theory, there's a book for everyone from 0 to 18 in this book. And there's also lists in the middle of the book where you can find particular obsessions like football, dancing, horses, technology, and there are lists of the 10 best books relating to those things like dinosaurs or insects, that kind of thing. So it's a useful kind of reference book, as well as a book to help you find the right books to help your children at particular times of their lives. And this was a more demanding book to write in the way, because the Novel Cure was really fun. We had lots of entertaining ideas with it. We were putting in all our favorite books, our favorite cures. Some of it was very serious, but a lot of it was more lighthearted. With this one, it was a bit more serious because it was for kids. We didn't want to treat ailments in a frivolous manner, but on the other hand, we did actually have lots of fun as well with some of the more kind of light-hearted ailments that children have as well. So there's cures like being too big for your boots, or not wanting to go to bed, that kind of thing. So that's the essence of the way we practice bibliotherapy. But then also after that, I wrote another book called The Art of Mindful Reading, which in a way has lots of the ideas enacted in bibliotherapy in it. So I was saying earlier that some of the things we talk about in bibliotherapy are different ways of reading. So I talk to people a lot about not just reading books, but listening to audiobooks, also reading aloud to each other, and doing things while they read. And all of these ideas are in this book, The Art of Mindful Reading, which has 5 different chapters about different topics within reading, like ways of reading, reading like a child, sharing the joy of reading, losing yourself in a book, finding yourself in a book, and then putting down the book. So it's all about, in a way, getting more out of reading in different ways, but it's practical, and it's in a way about the physical act of reading, whereas the Novel Cure and the Story Cure are more about actual books to read. And then just to mention one last useful book, which I now can't see, here it is, 30-Second Literature. This is another book that I edited and I wrote quite a lot of. I wrote about half of it. This is all about different topics within literature. So you've got everything from early literature, medieval literature, different kinds of poems, different types of literary prose, epic poems, and different authors. We have little double page spreads about particular authors, narrative voice, and it's a really nice sort of coffee table book with lovely illustrations. So this is a kind of useful more academic book in a way.
Mm.
So does that give you enough of an idea about the way we practice bibliotherapy?
Well, I say it's very fascinating. I mean, when I first came across the subject matter, I thought, all right, book reading, perhaps you talk to a specialist or a therapist, and then you tell him or her the issues, and then he or she will recommend books. But it sounds very methodical, actually. You know, you have a checklist, you actually have written a book with all the ailments and what books should be read. I think that's very methodical, and to me, that's very fascinating. And I think that goes well to some of the questions that I have, really. To begin with, um, you obviously early on you mentioned about ailments, and then the books recommended for that particular issue. But would it be sort of like an evolving list, because obviously books keeps coming out, and when we're talking about maybe different cultures, would that be taken into account in practicing bibliotherapy, or because you mentioned about it's a very sort of tailor-made approach. I just want to get a sense, because if we're talking about, let's say, in this part of the world, in Asia, obviously we are talking about many, many cultures. How does that, in general, that theory apply in a more localized or different cultural context?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we do try as much as possible to keep evolving our list of books. So The Novel Cure was published in 2013. It's probably time that we had a new edition with new books in it too. And we're always trying to find out more about books around the world and include them in our prescriptions. So whenever we do have a bibliotherapy session with someone from a different part of the world, we try to include some books from there in our prescription. And it's also true that whenever I talk to a client in Singapore or Hong Kong or in Delhi or wherever around the world, I always get new recommendations from them as well. So my book, where I write down all my thoughts whenever I do my sessions with people, is always full of suggestions from them as well. So it is a two-way process, and I'm always finding out new things that I want to read. And then also there's the difficulty of whether things are translated, particularly if they've only just been published. So it is something we're aware of, is trying not to be too Eurocentric and also not too Anglocentric, because we are the three bibliotherapists who work at the School of Life. We're all English.
Mm-hmm.
So we're very aware of trying to embrace other cultures as well. And we do have other bibliotherapists around the world who we've trained, some in Australia, some in Canada, and some in South Korea, who we also have had feedback from, who give us books that they really enjoy as well. So, and which they can recommend as bibliotherapy prescriptions. So it is an ever evolving list of books that we're recommending.
That sounds very interesting, and I think that naturally leads to my next question. It's okay. What kind of attraction are you seeing from around the world? I mean, obviously you mentioned the fact that there are free bibliotherapists based in the UK, and obviously you are very mindful of the fact that you don't want the whole approach to be too Euro or Anglo-centric. But over the years, have you seen a bit of a pickup in different places, or maybe they want to start a more localized program, or are you seeing that more people are paying attention to this particular therapy? Because when we are talking about therapy, I mean, naturally people think about, okay, do I have to visit a particular person, or do I have to like in a more traditional kind of one-on-one kind of talking? But obviously, with this bibliotherapy, what I'm seeing is it actually can open up lots of opportunities. So how do you see about the development, on one hand, in general, bibliotherapy, and then it's what kind of attraction are you seeing from around the world?
I think we are seeing more and more people who are interested in bibliotherapy. I do regular sessions on Instagram also every Wednesday night, which anyone can join in for free. Do come along, 9 p.m. UK time. And partly through doing them, I've met lots of other people around the world who join in, and quite a lot of them are starting their own bibliotherapy practices in other countries. There's in India particularly, it seems to be quite popular at the moment, also in Canada, and we get a lot of interest from the United States as well, and Australia too. So people are more keen now to start their own bibliotherapy practices as well, having seen the model that we've been doing in the UK that's been successfully going since 2008, so more than 10 years. And so we have started training people in other countries as well to be bibliotherapists. So that's really great and really interesting. And of course, we feel that if people are working on site on the ground in another country, they will have all the relevant texts at their fingertips to that country, which we sadly can't have everything in our heads and at our fingertips, because we don't know every culture's literature in the same way as we know our own. So I've also spent some time in the UAE, in Sharjah, teaching bibliotherapists there as well, and that's really interesting to have the perspective of the Arabic literature, which I don't know so well as well, and I would love to. I wish I could speak Arabic too. So yes, it's an ever evolving situation, and I do think the word is spreading and people are becoming more and more aware that it's a great way of having therapy, which, as you say, is different to a traditional kind of therapy. I think people find bibliotherapy a little bit less intimidating than traditional therapy, because with bibliotherapy you're talking about yourself through the lens of books, and you can be in a safe place just talking about the books if you don't really want to talk about yourself, but you can reveal a lot about yourself through talking about the books, and that is a great thing, which I think makes bibliotherapy so attractive, is people often come to it as in a way as a lighter form of therapy, because they don't feel like they're going to have to completely bare their soul to a therapist and go into the depths of what happened to them as a child, or expose themselves over a period of months as they would with therapy. Whereas with bibliotherapy, they will see us once, then if they want to, they might see us again a few months later to talk about the books that they've read. So it's much more of a gradual process, which is hopefully something that's really fun and enjoyable to do.
That sounds good, and I think so. I'm so curious as to what kind of a feedback you got from your clients. Like I mean, earlier on you mentioned about the fact that bibliotherapy is more like versus the traditional sort of therapy. Clients feel less intimidating, and so have you got any sort of very sort of special feedback from the clients? Either they say they've never thought of the wonders that bibliotherapy could have done to them, or maybe they felt like after they've done with your therapy, they felt some kind of a change. Any sort of kind of feedback like that?
Yes, I have had a few clients who it's had a very big effect on. So there's a guy in New York who first came to me when he was thinking about having his first child with his wife, and he was very nervous about becoming a new father. And I gave him books about fatherhood, such as To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and Roald Dahl's book for kids, Danny the Champion of the World, which has a wonderful father in it, and also a book by Nicholson Baker called Room Temperature, which is all about feeding a newborn baby. And they're all books that are very loving and positive and have great role models as fathers. and he read those, and he said he felt really prepared to be a father now, really happy to embrace this new role, because he was scared about turning his back on his bachelor life, his life of freedom, and having the responsibilities of being a dad. So I then carried on seeing him every couple of months for a few years, and he really loved all the different books I gave him during the period of his child growing up and then him having a second child. So that was a really lovely ongoing experience that I've had. Then I've also had some people who have been bereaved. There was a very sad lady who had lost a child, which was really awful. And she'd also lost her mother around the same time. And I gave her lots of books that helped her to think about her grief in different ways. And with grief, it's always very different. Some people really want to read about people in the same position as them. So they might like to read a book like The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, which is all about the loss of a husband. Other people want to just escape and not think about their grief. So it's very much a sensitive situation that's ongoing. And with her, I did give her some books that were about losing a child, which did really help her. So, and she said that bibliotherapy for her was a complete lifeline because she was going through such an awful period. And I think when something so intense happens to you like that, it can be very difficult to talk about it with your friends, and your friends don't necessarily know how to help you. So it can be really great to lose yourself in a book if possible. And she did say that that really helped her. So those are some particular examples. But then I've also had some people who've been woken up to reading, just to actually enjoy reading by me giving them the right book that got them excited about reading, which is always really exciting and fantastic when that happens. So I think that's the wonderful thing about being a bibliotherapist, is that if you give them the right book at the right time, it can completely transform their lives and set them on a new path. And I've also had some people who have taken radical different routes in their lives because of reading the right book at the right time. So I had a guy who was very fed up with his job, stuck in a rut, couldn't really see what he was going to do with his future. And I gave him this book, which I have here, The Year of the Hare, which is a Finnish book by a man called Arto Pasalina, which is all about a man who's fed up with his job, stuck in a rut, and then one day he unexpectedly has a car accident, hits a hare, and the hare is injured, and he picks it up and goes off into the forest with the hare, and then has all these adventures with the hare, who is an ordinary animal. He's not a talking hare or anything. And he then just changes his life because of that chance accident. And I think, although I'm not advocating that everyone should go off into the forest with a small animal, it's a book that shows you that you could change your life, you could go in different directions, and you can start afresh. And that did work for the client that I gave it to, so that was good.
Good. So it sounds like, I think when people think about therapy, they think, oh, there must be something wrong with myself, or I need a therapy. But what I've been listening is actually it can be a very specific sort of, therapy for maybe a live event. It's a very one-off kind of thing. It doesn't suggest that the person has any issues, but it's just because of that particular live event that comes with anxiety or whatnot, and they wanted to do something to perhaps make them feel less nervous. And I think that is where bibliotherapy can come in.
Yes, so I think you're asking about whether it doesn't have to be for a specific issue. Yes, so quite often I have clients who just come because they are readers, they love reading, and they just want to have a new direction in their reading. So quite often they might feel a bit like they're just stuck in a rut. They've been reading crime fiction for the last 10 years. They want to read something new, go in a new direction, or they love science fiction. They only ever read science fiction. They want to start something new. So then that's really fun. I love having clients like that because I can give them a series of books which they would never have thought of reading themselves, but which I hope they will love. And with those kinds of clients, it's a question of finding out what are their passions, what are their hobbies, what makes them tick. Do they love going into the outdoors, or do they love playing games on the computer, or are they mad about cooking? And then I find novels which might relate to some of those activities to get them interested and then send them in those directions. So the other thing is with bibliotherapy sessions is quite often it's given as a gift. So the person who's given it as a gift doesn't necessarily know what they want from the session. They just are open to the idea. So in those instances, I have a lot of fun with giving them books they would never have found themselves. But also I talk to them about the way that they read and who they read with. So I do very often encourage couples to read aloud with each other, because that's a really lovely way of communicating together and coming together in a different way to how they normally do. And people often haven't thought about that really. They think about reading aloud with their children, but they don't necessarily think about reading aloud to each other as adults. And also people who are single, I encourage them to get together in a group to read aloud as well. And people find that really a wonderful thing to do. And that can be quite life transforming as well for couples and for groups of friends, because there's something very generous about reading aloud. When you read aloud, you're giving of yourself to the listener, and the listener is giving their attention to the reader. So it's very generous both ways, and it's a way of spending time together which is very intimate but also very creative.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, earlier you mentioned it's good for individual, it's good for couple or even friends. Now, what about kids or family members? I mean, obviously, we always, I remember back in those days, there's a great value. There was used to be great, and I still think there still is great value placed on reading books to kids. But what about, like, does bibliotherapy work for kids? And secondly, is what about family? I mean, when I talk about family, is obviously these days we spend lots of time with our phones, and everybody's paying attention to their own phones. We've not much interacting between even family members. So, I mean, increasingly, I mean, obviously, I think there are people asking questions whether there is good actually for family, for relationships between family members. Now, leads me to think, how about bibliotherapy as a way to, I guess, to do something a bit more old-fashioned in the sense of let's just put aside your phone and let's just focus on books, and hopefully through the process, that way, I guess we start some kind of a sort of person-to-person interaction. What do you think about it?
I think it's a very important and great thing to bring bibliotherapy to a family context. So I do quite often talk to people as a family, or to couples in relation to their family, or I sometimes also see children on their own and talk to them about their reading. But I think one of the things that is really important is to find ways of reading together as a family. So one thing I often suggest is to have what I call a Victorian reading afternoon. So on a Saturday or Sunday, I suggest that the family all get together in one room or outside in a garden or in a park, if that's possible. And they leave their phones behind. They turn off the Wi-Fi. they don't even have the phones with them, and then they read together for an hour if possible. And that, when I say read together, I mean they read their own books individually, so they're silent, but they're just all in the act of reading together. And I think that's a really lovely thing, and I've had lots of families successfully doing that, embracing that idea. And then they say, okay, every Sunday afternoon 2 o'clock, that's our Victorian reading hour, then we're going to read. And it's just really nice to get into that habit, because a lot of our kids these days don't spend that much time reading. They're always on their phones. So they have to maybe slightly be forced or nudged into doing it. And this is a good way of making it happen. And they might grumble at first and be like, oh, I want to play games or be on my phone or go outside and play football. But if you make it happen a few times, then they gradually actually enjoy it and realize it's really fun. And also with younger children who are, toddlers or babies, they at this point can't read, but they can be part of the family activity. They could be on the floor, scribbling, drawing, playing with building blocks or whatever, but just being part of it, so they know it's a regular activity. So that's one thing. And then also I encourage people to read aloud together as a family as well. So that's a separate idea, but maybe it's something else that could be once a week, or if that seems unfeasible, once a month, when you get together in an evening, ideally maybe round a campfire, or somewhere outside by a lovely lake or pond or in the park, and everyone sits around together and reads a story aloud together. And depending on your ages, then it depends what kind of book it might be. But actually in the Story Cure, we do have a list of the best books to read aloud. So we've got lots of suggestions there. And I also have suggestions for short stories to try reading aloud. So those are two ways that we encourage families to do more reading together. And we also talk about having a mother-daughter book club or a father-son book club, not wanting to be too sexist about these things, but it can be quite a nice thing to get together with other parents and have all the mums or all the dads reading a book concurrently with their sons or daughters, and then getting together and talking about that. And I've known a few families that have done that over the years, since their kids were kind of 5 up to when they're 25. And this has had a really big effect on them in terms of their learning, because they've chosen the books relevant to that child's age as they go along. So they start off with really young children's books, like picture books, Very Hungry Caterpillar or whatever, and then they gradually move on through their teens and read young adult books, and then on to adult books. And it is a really great thing to do, because it gives a reading structure to the families and gets the adults and the kids involved together in reading at the same time and talking about the book.
So that's good. I think that this must be something perhaps families would be quite interested to explore. I mean, I think these days I've heard quite some people lamenting the fact that now these days we all spend too much time on our phones, and people are not talking to each other, and that's not good. And what could be done? And I think really people should look into book reading, specifically about the way to read books, not really just leave the phones behind, turn off the Wi-Fi, and just read. And perhaps something good can come out from it.
Absolutely, definitely. I also have another idea that I can just quickly demonstrate to you with kids who are very reluctant to read because they might be very restless. I encourage this idea, which I'll just try and show you. So I have a hula hoop, and I get the children to read while they're hula hooping. So tell me if you can't see what I'm doing. But here we go, hula hooping and reading at the same time. So then this becomes something of a kind of talent that they enjoy doing, and they can keep going for a long time, maybe 5 or 10 minutes or longer. I can do it for 20 minutes, half an hour. And it's nice because it stops you being restless while you're reading. And it also keeps you physically occupied. So your brain can focus on the book. So it's particularly good for kids who might have ADHD, but also good for adults.
Wow, impressive. I've never thought that one could doing hoops and read at the same time. I mean, that must be quite something. Very fascinating. Yeah.
It's good for people who have become a bit restless. And I think with everyone nowadays always looking at their phones and being easily distracted,
if
you do something like that, then it can help you to actually focus on the book.
No, good. Now, before we continue, so if you have questions, please do ask before, I'm just quite mindful of the time. So if you have questions, please ask, and we're sure to get to the questions. So I guess to do a bit of a quick wrap, I mean, we talk a lot about bibliotherapy, but I think the one burning question that I have is, okay, does it have to be done in a group setting, or one-on-one, or what about self? Could someone just do it by themselves because they feel so confident that they could just read a book that perhaps with just some guidance? Like, what's the best way to approach bibliotherapy?
Well, we tend to do bibliotherapy mostly one-to-one. So it just because it's often easier to get to the hub of what is worrying someone. So it can work most easily in a way with the individual one-to-one. But we do also quite often do bibliotherapy with couples, which is also really nice. And when we have the couple and the bibliotherapist talking about what to read, and then we will also talk about what you might read together and how you might spend time together reading, and how you might read each other's favorite books as a way of getting to know each other better, things like that. But then we do also do group bibliotherapy sessions sometimes, and that can be really great because you get different discussions coming up when you have a group of maybe 10 people and the bibliotherapist leading the discussion. Then people have a kind of hive mind, which makes ideas come out about different ways of sharing books. And also people remember books that they've read just because of talking about it in a group. So we do quite a lot of group bibliotherapy sessions at the School of Life, or we did before the pandemic, and hopefully we will again in the future. And they can be really interesting because it's a different way of sharing ideas. But I would say on the whole, with most bibliotherapy, it is easiest to do it in an individual way, because with the one-to-one chat between the bibliotherapist and the client, you can get to the heart of what that person is really feeling in terms of what they want to read and also what's happening in their life.
And one last thing, do you have any advice for people who are looking into bibliotherapy? What things they should be aware of before they actually really start thinking about it?
So when you say people that are looking into bibliotherapy, do you mean looking into having a bibliotherapy session?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is to have a good awareness of what you like to read. So one of the things I also talk about in bibliotherapy is keeping a reading notebook. And I always encourage people to find a nice notebook that they like as an object. And then whenever they finish a book, to write down to devote one page of their notebook to the book they've just read. So they should write down the title of the book, the author, the place they were when they read it. So if they read it in a garden or in a park or on an aeroplane, that will remind them a lot about the experience of reading the book. And then a few lines about the book to remind themselves what they thought about it. So having a reading notebook is a really great thing, and it helps you to remember what you have read, of course, and what you like to read. So if you're coming for a bibliotherapy session, then it's great to try and have a list of all the books that you have really loved and to think about those. And also, you know, the books that have had a big effect on you, the books that might have changed your life in some way or woken you up to a different aspect of life. And we do ask all those questions in the questionnaire, but people also quite often send us a list of all their favorite books, which is really helpful. Some people use Goodreads or sites like that to keep a document of what they love reading as well, and that's really helpful. So those are important things. And then also it's important to think about the way that you read. Do you tend to read in bed? Do you tend to read first thing in the morning? Do you tend to always read a book, or do you like reading on your phone? Do you use an ebook, or do you listen to audio? Do you ever read with anyone? So all those ideas about the physical act of reading, how do you do it? And then also, what are the main genres of fiction that you like reading? Or if you prefer reading nonfiction, what are all those types of nonfiction, and why do you read them? What are you looking for when you're reading? Are you looking mostly to learn about the world? Are you looking for knowledge, or are you looking for emotional wisdom, and to expand your soul? Are you thinking about the future of the human race? So there's a lot of big things to contemplate in bibliotherapy, but with all of those things, they will also be brought out by the bibliotherapist. So I quite often have clients who come in completely cold, not knowing what to expect, and haven't made any preparation, but they will have done the questionnaire, which actually is a really good start.
Very good. Thanks for all these wonderful sharing. And I have some questions coming in, so let's just open up and let's see what the questions are. So first of all, the first question that I have, does bibliotherapy help for people who has depression or other psychological problem?
Yes, very much so. And I think quite a lot of our work as bibliotherapists is in helping those kinds of problems. So it is always very tailor-made, as I was saying, because some people who are very depressed might actually find it difficult to read. They might not want to sit down and read. So for them, it might be better to listen to an audiobook. And some people who are really depressed might want to read about other people who have depression. So we would then give them books such as The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, which is an amazing book in which someone is very depressed. But other people might want to read books which completely take them out of their depression and take them to a place of escapism. So that's what we have to discover as bibliotherapists. Would they rather kind of delve into what it is that's making them feel depressed and talk to other people through a book who have the same situation? Or would they actually like to just go off on an adventure as a way of escaping their depression? But I think bibliotherapy definitely has a huge role to play in helping people with depression and anxiety as well.
Good. Oh, and the next question is bibliotherapy a type of art therapy for professional practitioners?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say yes, it is. And I am friends with lots of art therapists who I definitely think use art in the same way as I use books. So with art therapy, you're tending to get people to express themselves creatively as a way of dealing with issues that they have in their life. So it is a bit different because with bibliotherapy, it's not so much about expressing yourself, it's more about recognizing yourself in a book and seeing different ways of seeing the world and different ways of seeing your life within a book. But I think they definitely have a lot in common. And I think lots of art therapists also like using bibliotherapy as part of their therapy. And I'm also an artist myself. So I do sometimes talk to clients about using art as a way of helping their mental health as well.
Thank you. And I have one more question coming in. So, as we emerge from COVID, how can we leverage the power of the bibliotherapy in addressing COVID or post-COVID stress and anxiety?
So yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's so many aspects of society which have been affected by COVID that it's difficult to know where to start. But I feel that bibliotherapy has a huge amount to offer to the world as we come out of COVID, partly because people in some ways have become more socially anxious because we've all been hiding at home, keeping away from each other, and having to be isolated. And now that we're coming out of that, hopefully, most places in the world are emerging from that situation. We need to find ways of interacting again. So I really think that the book clubs, which I talk about a lot with bibliotherapy, can be really helpful. And also reading aloud together can be a great way of bridging the gap between solitude and society, because when you're reading aloud, you're not having to actually talk to each other directly because you're talking to each other via the book. But then it gives you a platform by which to have a conversation afterwards. So that can be a really great method. But then also reading aloud is something I've been talking to people a lot about during the pandemic when they're separated from their loved ones. I've encouraged people to read aloud over Zoom with a loved one who's far away. So they might have shared a short story or even a whole novel over a period of months over Zoom. And that's been a really great way of communicating from a long distance and having something to talk about. So as we emerge from the pandemic as well, people can continue to do that, but actually in person. So I think there's lots of ways that bibliotherapy can bridge the gap between the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic world.
So you mentioned about book club. I have one thing very interesting is, I mean, obviously book club is nothing new. I mean, we have book clubs everywhere in the world. But I think with the I would imagine that because of all the internet and all these digital platforms, then increasingly people turn online as their source for information or whatever. But now that because of COVID and whatnot, then it seems like we can sort of repurpose book club as a way to sort of reconnect people and help, I guess, revive sort of personal relationship. Do you think that could happen?
Do you mean it could happen with more
people joining book club?
Yes, I do. I think a lot of people during the pandemic, they had to change the way that they had book clubs because they had to go online. And actually quite a few book clubs floundered because they didn't enjoy the online process, which is fair enough. I think some of them worked really well online and some didn't so much. But I think with the emergence of people out of the world of lockdown, people are really turning back to book clubs, and I think it's a really great way to connect. There's so many fantastic books that have just been published as well that everyone wants to talk about, and also authors are more and more keen to get involved and to come along to the book clubs virtually or physically. And during the pandemic, a lot of authors joined in with book clubs because, you know, they want to connect with their readers. So I think book clubs are actually going from strength to strength. And also because people still can't necessarily go to literary festivals because we're still not necessarily gathering together in big groups. A book club is a nice thing to do because it's a smaller group. It's quite contained, it's easy to manage, and it's a great way for people to come together in a safe way.
Thank you very much. And I think we have now come to a close. I think it's approaching 7 o'clock our time here in Hong Kong. So first of all, thanks to you, Ella, for great sharing. I think we've learned a lot about bibliotherapy tonight. And I think, I mean, certainly, we love books, and I know book reading is very powerful. I think tonight we've learned something new. So thanks, Ella, for a wonderful sharing. And before we close, I just want to give a plug to Asian Society Hong Kong. I mean, they organize lots of wonderful programs. So if you want to find out more, check out their website or follow them on their Facebook page. And I guess on that note, good night to our audience here in Hong Kong, and you have a great day ahead of you in the UK, Ella. And thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jerome. Well, it was great to meet you and an honor to be with you this evening. And I hope that everyone will share the joy of books and carry on reading together, start book clubs, read aloud, and have Victorian reading hours at home as well.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.